Okay, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great event on tap, as always, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speaker, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your question and answer tab on your interface and submit your questions, and we will try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. We also have 2 polling questions throughout today's webinar, and we have a fabulous interactive chat option on this interface that we utilize, and we hope that you will as well, because we really want the webinar to be as interactive as possible. And I guess with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is the evolution of on-premise, cloud, and security. Our speaker today is John Kinsella, who's the Chief Architect at Accurix, and obviously understands the reason why I'm kind of tripping over the word on-premise. So, John, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Charlene, and I appreciate the intro. So for those who are just joining at the beginning of recording, we usually have a little bit of setup before these calls, and Charlene was actually correcting me on the title of the slide, which I'm aware, on-premises versus on-premise. Yeah, as we've been doing our talk proposals and our PowerPoints and everything for this, we've been getting redlined all the time, but I'm using this as a colloquialism, so I usually don't have to talk about my titles today. I do, so hopefully that's a start, and we're all up here from here. As Charlene was saying, everyone, again, Charlene, thank you. As she was saying, I had a sugar buzz, so I'll settle down into this over a few minutes. But as she was saying, please make this interactive. Please ask questions. Like most of you, like a lot of you, I won't say all of you, I miss having an environment or an audience in front of me that I can actually look at and talk to people and see what's going on. So comments, questions, any of that type of stuff. We've got a few polls. This is informational. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Accurix. I'm not going to kid you. This is also meant to be entertainment, right? So I hope there's a few funny ha-has in here for you. And I hope you get something out of this. So my name's John. Good to meet you all. Chief Architect at Accurix nowadays. Previously, I was a co-founder of Layered Insight. They were acquired by a company called Qualys, where I was their VP of engineering. Been around the road a few times, pretty into open source. Nowadays, I'm active in CNCF and Kubernetes worlds from a security point of view. And also, I'm the host of co-host of Application Security Weekly. So hopefully I'm able to talk and make this interesting for everyone. So another comment on the title here. You're going to hear me talk a lot about hybrid compute. And when I'm talking about hybrid compute here, to me, there's not a lot of difference between hybrid and on-premise. So this is not bait and switch. I am going to be talking about on-prem in here. But I use those phrases sort of interchangeably. I hope you give me that level of variation. And hey, if you want to challenge me on some of this stuff, throw in a few questions and answers. I'm going to try and keep my eye on Q&A during this talk. But honestly, I might not see stuff till we come to the end. We've got about 10 minutes at the end to go through this and answer any questions you have. So here we go. What is hybrid? And this is a very open-ended question. What is hybrid? What is on-premise cloud? On-premise, I think, has a little more of a concrete definition, if I can dare make that pun. But what we're talking about here from a hybrid point of view could be anything from, it depends on which person's asking, right? So this could be, maybe I've got a virtual machine in 2 different clouds. Maybe I'm, the DoD nowadays, they've got Kubernetes running in their F-16 fighter, so maybe that's hybrid too. If you look at someone like, I think it's, no, not Popeye, I think it's Chick-fil-A actually has Kubernetes installed at their on-premise site. So that's literally on-premise cloud. So there's different ways of thinking about this. And I think that's where I sort of want to start here. I've got a few of these slides where they're very open-ended. I want even you guys, as you're watching this and thinking about this, what does this mean to you? Is this something which is brand new to you, something you're just thinking about? We'll have a poll question on this in a few minutes, but is this something which is brand new to you? Or is this something which, it is evolving, as the title of this deck said? title of this talk. So I think there's different ways we can look at this. I will, before the next slide, do a little bit of a trigger warning. For those of us who've been around for a while in the industry, I'm sure if you can go back to my Twitter feed, you'll see at some point me complaining about this. Every talk about cloud for a while was talking about 800.145 and this definition of cloud computing. This is a really great document. I promise I'm not going to do the same thing we've done in the past. I'm not telling you about what a cloud is and all those type of things. There was 2 pieces on the back page of this document which very seldom get people talking about them or get any type of mention. One was the idea of a community cloud, which is a subject for a different talk. But the second is the idea of hybrid computing. So this is a document from 2011. Right, so this is the cloud hipsters over at NIST were a little ahead of their time, I think, when they put this together, but they were pretty good about looking at the different aspects of this. I'm not going to read you a slide, but really what they're saying here is, it comes down to 1 or 2 phrases towards the end of that sentence. The idea of something being portable in a standardized way, which you're able to use in 2 sort of different, I'll say, physical environments. I believe they use the phrase unique entities. But that's sort of what we're thinking about here. And I think to bring this back again to on-premise, a lot of people, when they think about on-prem, when I first think on-prem, I would think something in quote unquote my data center. What we're seeing is more and more people are referring to private cloud or private cloud in a public cloud as on-prem. So that could be a VPC at Amazon where you've firewalled off from the rest of the world and it's all RFC 1918 spaces. It could be something where, you've got VMware set up and running and you've just taken 3 or 4 nodes and you put them behind a separate firewall. So there's different ways you can think about some of these things. But I thought that was sort of an interesting look back and see about where did this actually start? What's the history of this thing look like? So first poll question.
All right, we got a polling question coming your way. What is your current hybrid cloud relationship? You can choose from just a dream. We're in proof of concept. We burst VMs to public cloud or containers, serverless. It's like the Matrix. So the polling question is in your polling tab, and you can go ahead and make your choice now. And while the audience is making its choice, just a quick reminder that we are recording today's webinar. So if you miss any or all of it, you'll have the opportunity to access it later on demand. We will be sending out an email after today's webinar that contains a link to access the webinar on demand, so you can watch it at your leisure. All right, guys, let's see where we are with our responses here. And would like to get a couple more people responding before we close out the poll. We've gotten a lot so far, but I want to try and get a good number that we can actually work with. So if I'd
realized when I was putting these poll questions together that Charlene, you were going to read them out, I could have had a little more fun with this, but that's okay.
Well, next time, okay? We'll do it next time. We can always talk about other things that kind of drive us up a wall from a grammar point of view, but I don't think people will be so interested in that. So with that, I'm actually going to close out the polling questions and we'll take this poll and we'll take a look at the results. Okay, if the poll wants to close for me. Okay, there we go. All right, so the question was, what is your current hybrid cloud relationship? Looks like the majority of folks said it is just a dream, followed by 28% who said we're in proof of concept. And then interestingly enough, 16% each said we either burst VMs to public cloud or container serverless. It's like the Matrix, dude. I know karate. Okay, all right, I'll close it. I'll go on mute now, let you get back to it.
Thank you, Charlene. And I think this is part of the reason I like asking questions like this, and preferably in front of a live audience, which, talk about dreams. Is to actually look around the room and see who else is at what stage of the journey, right? It's fine. And one, I didn't put it on this. I was going to put a bullet on the slide. I forgot to put it in. When I'm talking about I'm talking about the royal we, right? So it could be actually an organization. Usually that's what you think of when you think about hybrid cloud or these things where you start talking about some of the concepts and brands we're going to be talking about in a few slides here. But frequently also it could just be one person, either one person in a larger organization, or again, I'm doing a lot of foreshadowing, but I'll talk a little bit about my own personal hybrid cloud journey as we go on through this. But that's interesting, right? So, and what we've seen also both my current position and in previous companies, is there is a bit of that. I'd almost call it a bit of a valley in a U-shaped, where you see a lot of people they're really interested, they really want to get into it, and then I think people really sort of dive in very quickly, go down, and then come back up on the other side. Because what you find is a lot of these things they seem daunting, but usually once you get going, hopefully there's audience heads nodding. It's not that bad, so it's pretty easy to get to the matrix, even though there's a lot of moving parts in this. So we're talking about the history of hybrid computing. And, as I'm sure you've heard other people talking in talks like this, we go off and we Google and we're trying to figure out what we're going to put on these slides. And I landed upon this behemoth, which I probably could have put it in twice. We can come back. I'll refer to it, but I'm not going to talk about it again. This is actually an analog computer. So this comes back from, I don't think the slide had a date on it, probably did in Wikipedia. But, you're looking at something here from the 60s probably. Not really what I intended to talk about today. And I hope that you guys, that's not what you came to think about. And I really hope that's not what you had a dream about, because this is a completely different beast. So, but at the same time, it shows, a lot of these concepts are old or new again. It's to hit upon another sort of trigger out there. The cloud is just someone else's computer. Not really. We could go back to that NIST definition and talk about what's different in there. But we might reuse some of these phrases, but hopefully at the same time, we're bringing new value, new meaning, and new ease of use to them. So history of cloud computing. We have that far back. We've talked a little bit about 2011. I think I probably first touched some Amazon stuff in 2009. So it's been around for a while. But I think, again, thinking about evolution, the way this has changed has been really interesting. So 2009, 2011, there was hybrid out there, yeah, but it'd really be of the degree, and especially up into 2015, of how do I actually make use of resources either that I have or that I want to be able to access. And it's, the classic situation was I'm running out of space in my data center. Or, by the way, props out to the guys at OVH. They've had a really busy few weeks. The data center in, I believe it was France. So keep those guys in your thoughts if you want to talk about hug ops or people who've had a really difficult time. They're rebuilding. I think it's something like 1,000 servers a week after that UPS caught fire, or they believe that's what happened. But so, if that's your own data center, you need to go and do something. Are you able to go and rent servers in the cloud? That's the way we thought about this in 2015. Or, a really frequent use was disaster recovery. If you need a DR site, we'll go and get some servers across the other side of the country. We'll configure them, shut them down, and then bring them on only as we need to. And then we look at how this is going in 2020, right? Probably starting 2018, 2017. I did a whole separate talk on the history of containers, right? And that goes back into the 1970s, again, 1960s, with some of the IBM and early uses. But again, more modern, as we make these things easier to use and easier to consume. And we'll talk about one of the key reasons why here in a second. But these things are, what I've seen is, since a container itself is such a small item, not alone if you're doing serverless and functions, but sticking on containers, it's very easy to pick that thing up once you've built it and run it in 2 or 3 different data centers. Or more importantly, once you update it, to push that update out as a container image, right? You're not having to send a new AMI across or a whole new 20 gigabyte virtual machine image. So that ease of use and size allows really taking advantage of some of these hybrid concepts. And I think it's actually pushing them. And that's why we're now having the talks like this. On-premise, against that same type of thing. As we get comfortable, and that's either, I, or we as Accurix or previous companies or future companies, a lot of you guys, as we get more comfortable with these technologies, hybrid technologies or cloud technologies, we're more willing to consider what to us is on-premise as being in someone else's cloud. We have become confident in the level of security which we get from these products and the reliability. Michael Dell was in the news this week saying that he thinks on-prem is more secure than cloud. I thought we had that discussion about 5 years ago. It's still going. So if there's any Dell folks on the phone, my apology. But I think most of us agree that doing this stuff in the cloud is an acceptable place to do this, and still consider on-premise and your own. The other big reason this is catching on-premise hybrid is the flexibility of the network. Again, when we were green screening before this, I was commenting that, we do a bandwidth test before we do these type of talks. I've got a gigabit down right now, and I think it's about 80, 90 megabit up. I'm, just outside Seattle. I've got pretty great bandwidth. That's just me at like home, right? Not alone a business connection or at a larger corporation. So our ability to have a fast network is a really big piece of this. The network is the computer is a phrase which, some of the older guys will remember from Sun Microsystems. I used to live in Palo Alto, pretty close by, and I remember growing up, they had literally a dog house outside for their dog Spot, which was back in the Java days, right? And they really bragged about the network as a computer, and that was a core of them. After they got acquired by Oracle, it looks like they let that trademark expire. So of all things, Cloudflare, which I'm very fond of, picks it up. And I thought this was really interesting, right? So people still embrace this, people still see it. And if you look at Cloudflare now, those guys aren't a CDN, right? They're pretty hugely far from it. They're even just looking at the on the screenshot from their blog, talking about serverless and security and speed and all these different components that they have to it. This is what's powering us to do this. If we've got a very strong network, which allows us to do all the things you talk about in the definition of a cloud, API driven, event driven, being able to burst, be able to be really dynamic, billing no longer by the hour, but down by the minute, if not the second or sub-second. That's what allows us to do some of these concepts and actually allows us to invest more time into them. So I thought this was really interesting that not alone is it a core piece of what I think and what we're talking about, but also that someone like Cloudflare is embracing that for obvious reasons. So we talked a little bit about this hybrid. We're going to talk a few more slides about what hybrid and on-prem is, and then we'll sort of move on and go focus on the security side of things. But how is this being used? Again, I mentioned data center expansion. One of the big ones for me is reliability. If I'm worried about a DOS attack or a DDoS attack, Amazon and these large providers are doing amazing killer jobs nowadays of being able to defend these type of things. Microsoft's always in the news with their threat and Intel Center and the work those great guys do. But at the same time, if I'm able to take that workload I have and split it across two different data centers, either from a knock-on earthquake point of view or a DOS attack point of view, or maybe we fat-fingered something. Speaking of Microsoft, and we've made a mistake in one way or another. If we're able to go and say, well, let's stop using that one and let's go use this other one, or maybe it is a cloud provider mistake. That reliability is hugely valuable to a lot of companies, right? Where, we're always talking about downtime is now costing minutes, millions by the hour, if not more. So at some point, going to this level of effort makes a lot of sense. Does it always? No. Again, foreshadowing. What was the next slide? I was working on this about a year ago when I moved up here from Silicon Valley to Seattle. New computers, new house, new everything. I had taken half a year off work as a sabbatical just to sort of explore what I wanted to do next. And one of the things in my mind was actually hybrid computing, believe it or not. And how do I actually get a single box? I didn't want to have a bunch of servers here in my house, right? I've lived that life. I've many years ago had girlfriends ask, "What's that noisy thing in the corner?" I want to sleep at nighttime. To nowadays where I want that stuff as far away as possible. I like silence. So how do we actually take advantage of these, use these type of things, and then the cost management aspect of it? How do we, as we get more sophisticated and use more cloud? At some point, the finance guy comes and knocks on the door and says, "Hey, what's this bill? What's going on?" Again, this happens to me personally when I see my credit card bill at the end of the month. Why? What am I doing that the best I can? Do I really need all those resources? Is there a cheaper way to get those resources, either from my existing provider or to go to another provider? Is maybe that a good reason to go to serverless? And then also at the same time, do I need this data center? Do I need to pay for the heating and cooling and the staffing? And I know we're getting back towards that sort of religious question around cloud versus on-prem. Bear with me, cloud versus old school on-prem. And I think there's at least worth having those discussions around some of those type of things. And then really where, my neck of the woods nowadays, both for Application Security Weekly as well as Accurix and what I've lived and breathed for the last 5-10 years, the SDLC side of things, our SSDLC, Secure Software Development Lifecycle, the ability to have efficiencies in this. So if we're able to have a nice tight CI system where every time I check in code, our unit tests run against it. We do our sanity testing. We do our security testing. We approve a release. It goes ahead, or even maybe just it's automatically approved, right? Your unit test passed. Might as well go ahead and push that code out automatically. Push it out, and the smaller that component is to push, the more efficiently you're able to do it. It's one thing for me to go ahead and push out I'm thinking of an operating system, but let's go a little smaller. Maybe like a large scale monolithic application, maybe your finance application. It's one thing to roll that thing out, right? And when it takes, maybe a few hours of people's time plus database updates and all those type of things, versus the smaller that component gets. This goes back to Adrian Cockcroft's talk from probably 2008, 2009 about how you take a monolithic app and break it down into its pieces. But as you go towards that model of breaking off those onion layers, it becomes easier and easier to update those components without having QA have a complete conniption about, okay, do I have to retest all this stuff all again? So there's a lot of really good reasons to do this. And as I mentioned, how I got here. So this is actually in my house currently. It's not a live shot, surprise, surprise. But this is really all I have for serious compute here. It's a pretty beefy UPS. The power isn't really great up here in Seattle, and I'd heard that. So pretty beefy UPS, and then an Intel NUC. That guy's running Kubernetes, thing with a little skull on it. But I know I'm not going to be able to fit everything I want on that. Even with there's NAS on this picture, plenty of memory in this thing. I'm still going to need at some point extra compute. So for me personally, it's if I've got security cameras, if I want to do image recognition on them, or if I am doing research and development around more container stuff, or A/B testing of something I'm screwing around with, or maybe modeling the temperature of the house and things like that. Yes, I do these type of things. I am a nerd at heart, but do I want to always be doing these locally, or do I want to have 3 or 4 more servers here to do this? No. So that was the idea I had of, hey, can I use either Azure's ACI or Fargate or one of these type of things with a Kubernetes driver and actually be able to burst out into public as I needed to? Complete honesty, I didn't. Or I wasn't able to. A year ago when I was working on this, talked to a lot of folks, it just wasn't quite there. I think it is now to do on a personal level. I'm not saying companies don't do this, but so, next time I get bored, I'll give it a try again. But this is sort of the state of the art in this house. And there's different ways we can do this type of stuff. I've got to throw a meme in. So this is from Mementis. I'm also going to take it as a chance to drink as you guys read this. For those who are not familiar with, probably most of you aren't, this is a really great Twitter account. People send them in different memes, which people put together, and then they publish them back out. Kubernetes focused. I mentioned my girlfriend at the time talking about noise in the corner of the bedroom, but your kid can't get a Christmas gift because you spent $3,000 on a Raspberry Pi cluster. It's funny. Laugh, damn it. So with that, keep going. Hope this is interesting to people. We're about halfway there. Talk a little more about hybrid. This is an interesting aspect which has come out over the last few years, and then we'll start to talk about how do we secure these things and what's different about securing them from either old school on-prem or your data center, things like that. So what we've seen in the last few years from CSPs and cloud service providers, the big guys, is they've decided that there's some value in this hybrid thing. And that's really interesting because everything we've talked about so far, and I'm putting this slide up because I think this hasn't got a lot of coverage, and I'm hoping I'm showing something new to some of you guys and something to think about. When I last checked this week, I think you can actually go and turn on at least Anthos and Arc. I'm not sure about, you can't turn on Outposts. We'll talk about why. But 2 of these you can turn on by yourself if you want to. I think the majority of the use cases for these is going to be driven by enterprise sales teams from these companies. And that's interesting for several reasons. I mean, A, they're not going to do something unless they see money. They're probably not going to do something unless they see it's complex enough that they think they can provide a better service. And then the third way is they've realized that these technologies allow them to sell into each other's data centers, which is actually really interesting, right? So Anthos, I believe, came out first, and they're all very coy about that last point I said, but all of these guys do have the ability to run their cloud now in one of the other cloud providers as well as on-premise. So that's really interesting. Google's is really focused around Kubernetes and containers. Anthos does have some support for virtual machines. All three of these guys are sort of GitOps driven. So it is embracing everything we're talking about, right? Infrastructure as code, GitOps, modern DevSecOps, modern DevOps, all these type of things are at core in these concepts. They don't start cheap. So Anthos and Arc is Azure's version thereof. They're also more Kubernetes and container-based with some VMs. And then Outposts is Amazon's different attempt where they want to basically ship you a rack with all of Amazon in it. So that's definitely more on your prem, but I believe they can also run some of those components in other data centers. You can't just go and take like a NUC or something for this. I believe these guys support giving you a VMware image, but they're expecting you to run this. Last time I looked, I think Arc wanted you to run this on like a 96 core system. It was something pretty beefy. And if you're going to be engaging with a company like this and having an actual commercial on-prem thing like that, that's probably not something you go blink at. I mean, nowadays 96 cores is about probably 4 machines. This stuff's gone sort of crazy, but the reason I'm talking this through is, it's not just something that you have to do by yourself. I just mentioned VMware. I actually probably meant to mention them earlier. From a commercial point of view, they're one of the earlier folks in this space. There's been some other startups which have come and gone. But really, this is, something they've lived and breathed in, and they're trying to work with the cloud providers. How do we actually allow our on-prem VMware systems to burst into a public cloud? I believe their first partnership was with Amazon. Once Amazon got their Nitro stuff working, they were able to actually go through and start bursting into running VMware on top of, not quite bare metal, but close to it for Amazon. But I'm talking enough a lot about this. I hope this gives you something to sort of think about as we go through the rest of these, and I'll keep going. And as I said up front, since from when I originally wrote this slide deck and when we came here today to talk about this and have a good time, I realized that, we talked about on-prem in the title, and then not a lot of slides. So we're trying to fit this in here a little more. But I think it really comes down to it. This is the way I think about it at my heart. If you look at these 3 questions, is your on-prem cloud really on-prem? At least for us right now, the majority of customers that we're talking with, and I think I can say this from my previous life too, most of those customers are actually, their on-prem is in a private cloud, in a public private cloud. So that's really the way folks are going, I think. I'm not going to say everyone is. I know if you've got millions of dollars worth of servers, or you've got the data center space, or all those type of things, you have the CapEx already invested, you're not just going to go and throw it away. At the same time, heating and cooling is not cheap, plus upgrade cycles. And then I think the third thing is really core here. If you're really talking about on-premise, I've talked about this a few times in the last year or two, most of us are not air-gapped. Most of us, we have some, and really any type of cloud system, right? We want to interact with something else, unless you're, even a connected car nowadays. So that one's shot down. If you're military, I think even they're starting to have some, they're going to be red-blue networks, but they're going to have some sort of level of separation. The one which really shocked me was, if anyone out there is using or familiar with Cloud Foundry or Pivotal's, they're now calling it Tanzo, I believe. So if you look at those systems, I've interacted with a lot of those customers in the past. What I saw is about 75% of those customers, their build systems were actually air-gapped from the public internet. So if you wanted to, as part of your build, download a package, not going to happen. You'd have to download that before. So there are some use cases out there where this stuff is actually being, people are drinking the Kool-Aid, to use that phrase. I think for the majority of us, when we say on-premise, we're talking about something sort of separated from everything else. We still want to have some level of communication in or out, or we still want to have some level of access to it. Maybe it's not providing a service to public internet. Maybe it's just providing a service intranet or to, one of our group of employees. So there's different angles we can think about this. And I think that has, really, that's what's allowing me to use these 2 phrases sort of interchangeably. I think if I was going to look at it very closely, on-prem is a subset of hybrid. I think they're sort of related. So I hope you're going to give me that flexibility. And then sort of switching forward, how do we build this? How does this thing come about? From my point of view, any of this stuff means IAC. So IAC, acronym, which at least in my radar has popped up in the last 18, 20 months. Infrastructure as code. I almost forgot it. I talk about acronyms so much I forget what they mean. But IAC, it's interesting. I use this slide actually. Full disclosure in another talk. And what I realized is based off the colors, you can sort of tell how old these things are. So Chef and Puppet are the two oldest guys on here. I guess at that point in time, all the designers like blue. And then, we sort of came through, Terraform came along, Ansible, then Helm, then Customize. And I'm sure there's some newer ones. I was thinking this morning, I didn't get a chance to look. There has to be a JavaScript-based one that's using Node. That scares the bejesus out of me, but I'm sure it's out there somewhere. So maybe in the comments if someone knows of it. But thinking about through all of these, the reason I'm talking about the history and what's going on with them, we've had Chef and Puppet I was using Puppet at a startup 10 years ago, maybe a little longer. So this is, and I can go back further if anyone remembers, again, trigger warning, M4 was a configuration language I used in the late 90s and early 2000s for servers, right? So we've always had this dream of being able to automate the system in out of the system. And we're getting closer to it. And we wouldn't dare say that phrase anymore, and the system doesn't exist anymore, and we can talk about this in lots of different ways. But IAC is a thing which is becoming both more real and something which we can actually use easier. And I think that's great, but I think that's what allows us to do some of these things we're talking about. So with that, next set of polling questions.
All right, we do have another polling question that's just been pushed out. The question is, what percentage of your cloud is controlled by infrastructure as code? You can select from 0, it's all point and click, baby. Less than half, but the good half. Most of it, nothing funny here, sir. Or I configured Ansible to vote in this poll. So go ahead and make your choice. And as always, a quick reminder that if you have a question for John, you can use that question and answer tab to get it on in. We're going to have a few minutes near the end of the webinar to go through audience questions. And if you also have a comment you want to make about the presentation, about John's headphones, I don't know, and anything during the webinar, you can use the chat section and submit your chat. And we're trying to be as interactive as possible here. So I wish we could post memes actually in the chat queue, because I think that would be a lot of fun, but we're not there yet technologically. So we'll have to make do with what we've got. Okay, so I think we've got a healthy number of folks who have responded to the poll. So I'm going to go ahead and close it out and we'll take a look at the results. Okay, let's see, what percentage of your cloud is controlled by infrastructure as code? The largest number, 38%, said less than half, but of course it is the good half. And then 31%, the next largest percentage, said 0. It's all point and click. And then 24% said most of it. Nothing funny here, sir. So only 7% said that they actually configured Ansible to vote in the poll. So there we have it.
Must be one of my engineers.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And again, that's about what we expected, right? Which we're trying to put these into a bit of a curve when we come up with these questions and the answers. And I think most of us have, there's a curve, not just in the answers, there's that sort of bell curve on the resources you put into these things. So it's pretty easy to have Terraform spin up a EC2 instance. And actually, we're working on this. If people want to, you can literally see what I'm talking about right now. We have an open source project, Terrascan, which is our open source tool allowing us to scan IAC. This wasn't a predetermined plug. I'm just talking about it. But allows us to scan IAC for all these different things we've been talking about. It is part of what powers Actrix, the commercial product. But back to the point here, we've been working on improving test cases recently. So unit test coverage right now, I think, is around the score says, I want to say 75%, but if you look at what's not being tested, it's really closer to 85%. The guys have done really a crazy, amazing job to get those unit tests going. But one of the things we're working on now on top of that, we still want to be better still. Again, free download, open source, it's public. You can literally see this pull request will be added in the next few days. We're adding acceptance testing. And the way we've done that is, we sort of came up with a design diagram and we said, hey, we want to be able to make sure that when we do a release, that we've tested across all the platforms we support. So 64-bit Windows, 64-bit Linux, ARM Linux. We're working on ARM for M1 to make sure that build is clean. Mac OS. I think I mentioned Raspi. So we've got all these different platforms and architectures. Now we want to do end-to-end testing. We want to do spoke testing. We want to test the policies we have in there. We're trying to test as much as we can to really make sure that's a really great quality product. So one of our guys I sort of wrote up the design spec, with my architect hat on. One of the guys that went ahead and started coding this with my guidance, looking at Terraform, and exactly what I just said. So spinning up the test instance to do that test was the easy part in EC2 instance, or I think we're using Azure also. But okay, now I have to get my unit tests in there to get them. Well, first I got to check out the code, then I got to get a unit test, then I got to run the unit tests. Then one of the trickiest parts was like, how do I actually get those results back out of it, right? So what I'm saying here is the reason a lot of you guys are at all but the good half are nothing funny here is getting that last little piece to get this whole thing done. That takes a lot of effort. And the question is it really worth it? It's nice to say I've got 100% test coverage, or it's nice to say that completely everything we do is automated. But we all are faced with reality, and very few of us get to actually do everything we want to do on these. So that's where we are. But props to you guys for the progress you've made so far. So on-prem security, how is it different? We talked about air gapping, not really what I had in mind, but that's one way you can look at this, right? If you can air gap this, or like I said, military, red, blue network it, there's different ways you can access this. And I realize we might have some international customers. I know red, blue military, red, blue networks is more of a, at least in my mind, US military. I'm not sure what that is around the world. So don't mean to offend or talk about that from a very US centric point of view. My apologies. But how else can you think about this? What else can you do with this? And it really comes down to, what do you think about when you think about that on premise? Is it interacting with something else? Do you need to reinvent the whole stack? Do you need to have a WAF in there? How do you think about deployment of code in there? So there's all sorts of different ways. Again, this was one of those open-ended questions to let people think about this a bit. And I'm sure some of you did when you came here, and this is what you're looking for. But in a little more detail, what sort of floats your boat around that? And this could be more like, okay, well, we're going to have to secure both what's on-premise as well versus what's in the cloud. Can I secure that at once? Does the security of domain, maybe I've seen companies just put their low-level security stuff out in public or on-prem cloud. A few different ways you can do it. So that's sort of what I want to talk through our next few slides. But starting with back to our friends at Cloudflare, and still getting used to saying that, but the network is a computer. They are my friends. It's this concept, or this connection is the hard part for me. The network is a computer, right? And as you are looking at hybrid or on-prem or any of these type of things, that's probably the first way you're going to start. I thought about a certain point of view of like, okay, we could talk about, well, you don't have physical security, then what's the OS security look like? And then, actually build that whole stack up. I don't think that's this talk. I mean, it is in a way, especially if we just look through what I just talked about with that Terraform example. So all those pieces in that stack you need to think about. The question is, how do you go about it? Are you going to be trying to secure each one, harden each piece individually, and then build the next step on top of it? And again, a lot of this is going to come down to, what are you trying to secure? So if you're doing a banking application or a tax application, or I don't know, something of a high level of security. I guess nowadays that includes social networks, but what have you, something that's of high level, you're going to be a little more concerned about each level within there, and you are going to actually try to harden those components. Again, that can be automated, yeah. Or if it's something where you're just throwing an app out there like a container into, let's see, we've talked enough about Amazon, GKE. Maybe you just care about making sure your container is secured and scanned before you actually throw it over the fence. So there's different ways of thinking about this, starting with that network component. And I think that's, a lot of people think about network. I'm starting here from the point of, if this is on-prem, that's why I'm doing on-prem, right? Because I want to have some type of firewalling between this versus the next group over, next guy over. But thinking about it from this point of view, I think is really interesting. So the idea I'm trying to get across here, for a lot of us, this is no longer just I'm bursting to the cloud, or I'm using on-prem, or I've put my on-prem in a VPC or a private network, what have you. More and more of us are actually, we're choosing best of breed. So it could either be from cost point of view, or it could be from a speed point of view, or it could be from just excellence of a product. Maybe I'll see if I can skip the vendor names here for a second, but maybe one vendor is better at doing image recognition, and another vendor has a really fast network. I think the same vendor has both of those, but maybe there's cheaper or better CPUs at another vendor. Maybe storage is faster at one. Maybe one vendor has servers which are closer to the edge so that I can give a better feedback to my customers. Or maybe, as in this diagram as we're showing, maybe I don't always need to be developing a Kubernetes stack. So I'm not going to run a database in Kubernetes, right? You're not going to run a database in Kubernetes. Repeat after me. So maybe I'm going to go and get the database from Mongo, Atlas, right? And Atlas is hosted, say, on Amazon. But for some reason, I'm using GKE. I'm not talking about vendors one for about, 45 seconds. But maybe I'm using GKE for containers because Google now has autopilot, which will automatically do updates for me and keep it secure. Maybe part of my development team is using a pass, so they just want to fling their code into a serverless pass and just do it that way. So these could be multiple different containers, multiple different vendors, multiple different clouds. How do you secure this? And this isn't FUD, right? This is sort of what we're actually seeing, where the market's going, and probably the way Actrix herself is working, if I think about it. How do I deal with that? And as I already mentioned, this could be multiple different vendors, right? So as this gets more and more complex, those of you who said you had zero IAC, you better get your team typing. It's one thing to point and click this, and hell, I do it myself. I'm quite familiar with the cloud consoles from all these guys, and I've got my favorites. And if I'm just working on something, if you ask me to spin up a box right now to do some R&D, I'm going to point and click my way through it. That's the way I am. I'm very visual. But if you say, hey, I want to give this to a teammate who's in a different time zone and have them work on it while I'm asleep, or just see if they can run with the idea and go further, now it's going to get turned into some sort of a script. So where's that? As we go through that, and as we go down that path, I think you start realizing that if you want to do this, you have to have most of this scripted. And then once that is scripted, how do you go about securing that? Can you build the security into it? Do you harden as part of that process? Or maybe do you scan your scripts? If you're using a WAF, is the configuration for that WAF, web application firewall, is that part of the scripting system that you've actually set up? So these are things you need to think about. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. This is what happens when you work from home. You don't talk that much. But so going through this, right, this is sort of a core part of this to think about, I think. There's a lot of moving parts here. So far, as you guys think about this, I think that's where the point in time you start going back to that slide that shows Chef and Helm and these components, and think about, how do I get those things to work together? How can I define this so that, knock on wood, if everything blows up and we need to rebuild from scratch, or what we see a lot is we want to spin up a new environment for either testing or a POC for a customer or what have you. I want to be able to do that as quickly as possible. After I've done that the first few times, I don't want to do that again. So how do I secure that? How do I do that? And what does that look like? So we've talked about the hardening. We've talked about the networking. We've talked about not yet, but I mean, you could put data security into here, right? How do you do that encryption? How do you handle those keys? Again, that differs from one provider to another. Are you doing it best practices? Are you doing this from a way that's going to be repeatable? Is sort of the things that we think about. Excuse me. On-premise, someone's mic opened there. On-premise usually thinks about agents. So agents could be something very simple. Sometimes the agent's a good guy, sometimes the agent's a bad guy. This is a very cyclical pattern in computer security. Depends on the year and the vendor, right? Sometimes like, ooh, agent's bad. Sometimes people are like, oh, you have to have an agent. It comes and goes. we support both ways. We actually developed a product or a subproduct, something we called a bot, which we're able to install on premise. And then that does the local scanning and local understanding of what's happening in someone's environment, and then sends those results back up to the cloud. So while historically we had a SaaS product as well as an on-premise product, we found that once you go on-prem, either for me as a vendor, it's harder for me to manage and update and do things like that, but also the customer has to start thinking about managing and updating and doing things like that, and they don't want to do that either. So unless that's a fairly large established customer that has the capability to support something like that, most of us nowadays want to use SaaS, right? I don't want to. It could be something as simple as a status page. What came to mind? I don't want to run that software myself if I can go to statuspage.io, just whatever popped in my head. And it's the same for this type of thing. So if I'm able to come up with a tool which allows a user to have or a customer to have their on-premise system, and that's secure to the level they have, if I can run something in there which is able to access that data, grab just what's necessary and bring it back up, that seems like something which is a win-win for both of us. But I'm sort of curious if there's questions around that, or I think there's one or two might come up. I'm making a statement which some people might consider bold. I hope you don't, especially as we go more cloud-friendly. I think that becomes more common. So nearly wrapping up here. To talk a little more about Accurix and the way we think about this. And this isn't just us, right? This is the way the industry is going. We got IAC on the left here. So really walking through both an SDLC for IAC, as well as thinking about self-healing of that, because that's sort of the next step on top of this again, right? If I've got an environment where everything is coded and I know that it should be like that, and that's how it should be working, if I see what we refer to as a drift, do I have to get a human involved to fix that? Frequently, no. So, we start off talking about developing this IAC in all these different languages on the left, build and deploying through common deployment systems, I think from GitHub Actions to Circle CI to Atlantis to all these different types of things, to then running those in a public cloud. And this is one example of what these self-healing things look like. So, obviously for the sake of a talk here, I'm using a very simple example of maybe someone changed a CIDR block in a firewall rule to be fully open for testing. And you know how we all say, right? Oh, we'll fix it right after we do this. And then that never happens. If you've got a system which can go through and look at that and say, hey, that shouldn't be open, we're now able to either do pull requests back into their, literally into GitHub, whatever a customer is using, and saying, hey, we'd like to make this change. If you approve it, we'll go ahead and do it. Or if you trust us, we can do it automatically. So I think that's really sort of wrapping back around, coming from on-premise, all these type of moving parts. Is the right person available to actually make the fix, or can we trust the system to do it? Is I think a direction we want to go. So with that, I thank people for their time. I know people's time is valuable, so I appreciate you coming in, and happy to take questions now. Contact us on Twitter, or I remember Charlene has some prizes to give away. So
yes. Can you hear me okay, John? I had to change my audio outputs.
I got you.
Okay, awesome. Great. So we do have about 10 minutes or so for question and answer period. If you have a question for John, go ahead and put it on in the question and answer tab. We've gotten some great ones in so far, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right on into them. First question for you. How does having a local bot or agent affect the security of my cluster?
Good question. So depending on who or what, I'm talking about this from my point of view now, from an Accurix point of view, and actually previous companies too. An agent should be not listening on a network. It should be running with the minimum permissions. It's there to do a very specific job, I believe, in both security in depth as well as providing the minimal security to get something done, minimal authentication, authorization. So in Accurix's case, that bot doesn't listen on a network. It only makes calls back out to the public cloud to both upload data and figure out what to do. As well as we actually have in our documentation, these are the bare minimum authorization requirements for us to be able to get the access that we need to get that data.
Excellent. Okay. Next question here. How does vulnerability scanning work in an on-prem or hybrid environment?
Someone going after my heart. Some of the folks at Accurix keep trying to get me to write a vulnerability scanner. I've written these things multiple times before. I can't escape them. This is, man, if you think about modern IAC and containers and things like this, how we do vulnerability scanning is significantly different than how we've done it in the past. And that's probably where we get this interest from customers. How you actually do scanning, both in IAC time, getting that feedback back in a way which is those results back in a way which is consumable by a customer, by a user, excuse me. And then also scanning that same thing in production, right? So you scan that thing first, but then if you're running in production, you still want to know if a vulnerability has suddenly appeared in something which maybe you deployed a container 3-6 months ago. But on the counter side, I don't want to patch that thing in production, right? So how you actually take care of those vulnerabilities if they are found is handled in a different manner. And again, that can be done through IAC and these SDLC things we've talked about here, public or private or hybrid cloud. So that's sort of how we think about it. It's right now, I think there's a lot of great tools out there to do it, both open source and commercial. We are thinking about it, and I'm probably saying too much at that point, and the beatings will continue when I stop talking here from that one.
Okay. Well, then maybe you should continue talking. I don't know. All right, guys, we have plenty of time for question and answer period. Go ahead and get your question in if you've got one for John. Next question here. John, can you ascribe a roadmap approach to effective integration of security into DevOps? That's a lot to unpack there.
I believe that's going to be our next DevOps.com talk next week, right, Charlene?
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I usually don't say that, so I must mean it. If I was to go down that path, I mean, DevOps, DevSecOps is something, this is a whole, well, first thing I'll say, that's not something you buy in a box, right? DevOps requires a cultural shift in understanding how you're actually approaching these things. So how to bring security into something like that, we think about 4 sort of pillars. So there's infrastructure as code, drift as code, policy as code, and remediation as code. So these are sort of 4 areas of how you can really bring these things back to not just text, but make them something which have a very both definite definition in how they're actually deployed out. All these type of things, we still have to deal where nobody's a pure DevOps shop unless you're even younger than Accurix, right? We all have some sort of mixture of both these things going on. And really sort of part of the process of getting from A to B is figuring out, as I said before with some of the other examples, what are the cheaper pieces to get into that newer system and then start bringing other components over. So maybe you start with vulnerability scanning, or you start with controlling the firewall from IAC. And then as you get more and more of your code into that new format, then you think about some of the other aspects around it, such as self-healing.
All right. Great. So we are about 8 minutes to the top of the hour. Make that 7 minutes to the top of the hour. I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions. So we'll just keep rolling on. But if you got one, go ahead and get it on in. Even if we don't get to it during today's webinar, the folks at Accurix are getting a copy of all the questions that come in. So I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline after the webinar to get your question answered. But the next question here, how can you secure and hybrid where a hybrid environment where a couple of very old legacy apps are still living, obviously with little to no cloud specific security?
Yeah, and this is someone was listening to my last answer, and that's I'm sure this came in a little earlier, but that's that same thing. Is we have to have flexibility in how we're doing this. We have to have the ability to support those existing systems. One of the questions I used to get a lot in previous lives was, if we were purely container-based, could we come up with some way of dynamically creating a firewall between those containers and the mainframe? And honestly, I didn't do it then, but this is sort of a perfect example of that, right? How do you get those 2 technologies to work together? And it unfortunately is a case-by-case basis, because a lot of stuff that you see on the legacy side is very custom and very unique. So the ability to be able to secure both those halves requires a little bit of sort of thinking and head scratching around that. But in general, the way I think of it is focus on the newer version of it, the newer side of things, and then be able to come back through and support the older stuff as well.
Excellent. Okay. All right, we have one more question here. So if you have a question for John, go ahead and get it in, and we will definitely be able to get to it here. All right, here's a good one. If I built my cloud with point and click, what is the easiest way to move to infrastructure as code?
More point and click. Do I win something? No, and it's interesting. These questions we're getting are sort of focused around. None of us are purely just doing everything brand new, right? It's very easy to start with a clean slate. But it's a little more trouble to actually be able to come through and massage these pieces over. And that's, again, a good example of this is, I talked about pointy clicky. I'm obviously not the only person doing it, but what are the components which I need to do to be able to move from point A to point B? I do believe in that sort of, break things down into puzzle pieces, which are easily understandable and easily consumable. I've got a previous life as a consultant, so I think in that sort of multi-phase. And I think that's sort of how you go through this. It's like, okay, figure out maybe what's the point which is causing the most pain, and let's deal with that first. And then once that you get sort of a taste for it, you start understanding, oh, that wasn't that bad. Let me go and do the next one, And sometimes you actually get excited about this if you're me. But that's sort of, I think, how I'd go through this is working in components.
All right. Well, let me just see if we have any more slides or any more questions. Now, it looks like that is all the questions that we've gotten. So I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. And if you do have a question, there's still time. You can go ahead and put it on in. And like I said before, if we don't get to it during the question and answer period before the end of the webinar, the folks at Accurix will, I'm sure, be happy to follow up with you offline. I want to also let the audience know that we have some amazing handouts in our handouts section. We have a couple white papers and reports that are available to you to download free of charge. Lots of great information there. So I highly recommend you take a look at the handouts that we have in the handouts section, download them, and enjoy them to the fullest. Also want to remind the audience once again that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the webinar, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Following the webinar today, we are going to be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. The webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website, so you can go look for it there as well. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Okay, before we close things out, I do have 4 $25 Amazon gift cards that I am awarding today. So let me just get to my little list here of those winners. All right, our first winner today is Sean M. Congratulations, Sean. Our second winner today, yay, is Anastasia A. Congratulations, Anastasia. Yay. Third winner today is Jerry C. Congratulations, Jerry. Yay. And our fourth and final winner today is Phil with 2 L's, W. Yay. Congratulations, Phil. We'll be following up with all 4 of you via email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. And if you don't see anything in your inbox, please check your spam folder. John, what a great presentation. Thank you so much. So insightful, and judging from the questions that came in, some great questions that came in. So I'm sure the audience got a lot out of it also. So
appreciate the time. I hope everyone enjoyed. As you said, we'll take questions, or I'm on Twitter. We're happy to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can see on the screen that John's got his Twitter handle up there, as well as the Accurix. So feel free to hit both of them up via Twitter if you do have any questions or comments. But again, do want to thank the audience for joining me today. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.